Hello and welcome to the Fireside Chat on Jamaica's bright future in energy. We're part of today's Explore Do Business Jamaica Investment Conference. Hello again. My name is Matthew Perks. I am the CEO of New Energy Events. We run events focused on clean energy, designed to catalyze investment in the clean energy transition, in projects and programs across the region. And as part of that portfolio, we've had the huge privilege of working with Angella Rainford over the years. And Angella, who is with me here today, a delight to have you here. Thank you so much for making time. Angella is the CEO and founder of Rekamniar Frontier Ventures and also of Soleco. Rekamniar, as many of you will know, co-developed one of the largest solar plants in the Caribbean and the largest in Jamaica. And prior to that, Angella had a storied career at, for example, Goldman Sachs in the merchant banking division in London and New York. And she is here with me today to talk to us a little bit about her journey in Jamaica. It's been an extraordinary ride. We've got so much to learn from her. And again, delighted to have you here with us today. Hello and welcome, Angella.
Hi, Matthew. Thank you very much for having me. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again too. So, Angella, we've got a little bit of time today. And sometimes when we hear you at conferences, we hear you on panel discussions and you're part of a discussion with 4 or 5 other people. And so some of us will have heard parts of your story. Perhaps not so many of us, and perhaps not so many of us at this conference today will have heard the fuller story, the journey. And it has been a journey, I know. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, I think, is to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then to talk to us about the Paradise Park journey, the journey to the 51 megawatts of solar. And for those of you who haven't seen the picture, to understand what a 51 megawatt solar park, it's huge. It's an enormous undertaking, biggest in Jamaica. And then what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about the Jamaican energy sector, and then a little bit about doing business in Jamaica. So I'm really looking forward to this. And again, welcome. So Angella, take us back. You were at Goldman Sachs. You were doubtless doing extremely well. And then, you'd been at McKinsey before. You were checking all the boxes on the career ladder, and then Jamaica Solar. What was the genesis for that? Why did you make that turning?
Sure. So, well, thanks again, Matthew. So basically, to be honest with you, I'd always wanted to do something creative. I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So taking back to Goldman, to answer your question, I one day, I actually had given it quite a bit of thought and then decided, you know what, either I'm going to stay here for a while and this is going to be my career, or at some point, if you're an entrepreneur, you have either you're tossed out or you quit. I chose the quit option. So I went into one of my, to the head of the division's office. I still remember because I was literally shaking. I had written my little resignation letter and I was shaking like a leaf, and he didn't even look at the letter. And then the only thing he said to me is like, do you want us to counter offer? And I was like, no, do I really want you to counter offer or not? And counter offer basically means, is it about the money, right? That's effectively the question. Like, is it about the money? Are you being paid enough? And I sat there and I just said, no, like, no, it's not about the money. It's, I want to try something else. I think my story should be taking me a different path. So I'd spent about 3 years at that point in the bank, and excellent training ground. To be honest with you, part of my story is even linked to the bank, which I'll get to in a second. But then I started thinking about what should I do. I didn't know what I wanted to do before I quit. And I think that was, looking back now, slightly crazy. I wouldn't advise anyone to do that unless you're really, really sure. but I started searching. I needed to be able to leave the firm to be able to start searching. So I was looking at projects. I've always had an interest in developing countries. So I was looking at projects in Africa. And then I got this calling by my dad and said, why don't you look in your own country? Why don't you look in Jamaica? And I said, oh, it's going to be boring. I want to do something a bit more exotic. It's like, no, it's your own country though. So I said, okay, fine. So I went to Jamaica and I started looking at, first I started looking at the agricultural sector. Not many people know that, but that was what I started looking at, partly because my father was in agriculture, is in agribusiness. I worked on a deal in that sector, but it didn't really pan out. It didn't happen after quite a bit of frustration. When you go from working at Goldman, where things are moving lightning speed, and then you have to change and transition, it was definitely a learning curve for me. But then when that deal didn't happen, through my network that I developed there, I met a gentleman called Mr. Frank Phipps, who actually I messaged him last week. I keep checking up on him because I think he's about 93 now, almost turning 94. I know. So every moment I'm like, are you okay, Mr. Phipps? How are you doing? And so he was, at the time, he was the head of the Coconut Industry Board. But he also had an eye on, what was happening in terms of regulatory changes. So Jamaica, this is back in 2012. Jamaica basically had a shift where they changed the energy law, which allowed IPPs in renewable energy for the first time. And so he told me about this change, and I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. I'll take a look at it. And then one thing led to the other. I started looking at renewables, learning a bit about solar. I chose solar because that's the easiest one. Wasn't trying to be a hero. And then I decided, I'm going to give it a shot, but I need to pull together a team, and because there's things I didn't have, right? So my first meeting, to put into context, Matthew, my first meeting with the Minister of Energy, who was Philip Paulwell at the time, I had these business cards, which if you rub them hard enough, the ink would come off because they were like hot off the press business cards, not quite dry. And Mr. Phipps had organized that meeting. But anyway, so I came back to Europe because I'm based in London. I came back to London. And I thought, okay, here are the things I don't have. I don't have any money. I don't have any technical expertise, but I do have network and a lot of energy. And also, I like risk, right? And as an entrepreneur, you have to be a risk taker. You have to be willing to take risk. So coming back to Goldman and how the bank came into play, I started looking for capital, right, to develop the project. And I was sitting in the lobby, going to meet someone else who in the end didn't give me any capital, but a French gentleman, MD, he came down an escalator and he saw me waiting there and he's like, Angella, are you here to see me? And I was like, no, I'm not here to see you. And he's like, oh, well, call my assistant and Sandrine and book me something, who now actually is working with me. Sandrine, not the French MD. But anyway, so I met with him and he said, I think I know someone who would invest in this. And after, it took him probably a month to get back to me. But then he introduced me to a gentleman called Jacques Vera. And Jacques Vera is a very, very well-known, well-respected entrepreneur in France. And he was the funder for NeoWen. So he created NeoWen basically. And NeoWen didn't have at the time an international department. I met their international manager. It was his first day on the job. And I pitched them Jamaica. And I pitched them the idea of going to Jamaica with me to develop these projects. So basically they listened. And in the end, they said, okay, we're going to do it. But that was after the meeting. And it was a cold winter's day like now in November. I was in Paris. I got a message from a friend saying the RFP has been announced. And yeah, so basically I told NeoWen guys and they came to Jamaica, and then one thing led to the other. And before I knew it, I was a developer in renewables. So I'm going to pause there, but that's like how the story generally unfolded.
Let's just reflect on a couple of things. So obviously we're seeing the drive, the entrepreneurship already. And there's several firsts along the way, but how many people have sat in an office for managing director at Goldman Sachs and when asked, do you want us to counter offer, have said no? I mean, at Goldman Sachs of all places, how many zeros do you want me to add? So that was what, so the RFP was announced when? So when have you taken us to? Is this 2012? So that was
2012, exactly. Yeah. That was the first round. So after all that, I ended up I had an agreement with NeoWen. We reached an agreement in January. So I met them in November. By January, I had an agreement. I started securing land, developing the project, met an amazing mentor who now is no longer with us, but a number of the Jamaican community would know, Oliver Clark. It was his property. And we bid. So we bid, and a bit of anticlimactic, but we lost. We didn't win the first round. We lost on pricing. It is what it is. And I found out, I still remember, I found it in October of 2013. And it was a bit of a blow. I had at that point also started running out of money. 3 years at Goldman doesn't allow you to totally retire, especially as a junior person. And I had business school loans I had to pay back. So I decided to kind of go back to normal work. And after really trying, and I went back to private equity after that. So I ended up becoming an advisor to a private equity fund focused on Africa. So in a way, I guess I got that African experience. And they liked my profile because I not only had worked at a bulge bracket firm like a Goldman Sachs, but I also had been a developer. And it was interesting because it actually made me a better investor, because even interacting with other entrepreneurs who we invest in, they also started to see me differently because I had the scars, right? I think when you've gone through this, there's scars that you have. But anyway, so I got a call from NEON after I'd gave up on Jamaica, gave up on renewables. I'm like, okay, I'm back to my main job. And they said, look, the government has announced they're going to do another tender. This is now in 2015. And I thought, well, you know what? I have nothing to lose. I went into the office of the gentleman at the PE fund. I was a consultant for them. So he said, well, look, you're not a full-time employee. I don't care what you do in your spare time. So as long as it's your spare time and as long as you do what we need you to do. So I ended up partnering with NEON again, even though the terms of the deal changed the second time around, which I'll get to. But we bid in 2015, and lo and behold, got a message in 2016 that we'd won. And I was like, wow, this was May 2016. I'm like, I can't believe we actually won. So I started working like a classic Caribbean lady in the UK. I had 2 jobs. I had my private equity job, my day job and my night job, and then my development job. All holidays I took, pretty much I went to Jamaica, and I was not on a beach. I was like in the bush or dealing with some government agency. And the deal with NEON changed because the first round, they were happy they would have funded everything. The second round, they would have funded everything, but they wanted me to work. So they basically cut the deal saying, if you don't raise your share of the capital, we're going to dilute you. Right. Or we sign a deal now where you get basically a fee and we fund the entire thing. So I went, you know what, I've come this way. I brought you guys in. I'm not going to just take a fee. So I said, you know what, I'll take the red pill. So we had like a matrix moment. I'm not taking the blue pill, I'll take the red pill. So then that meant I had to raise half of the capital because I had half of the project. And I ended up taking a step back from my private equity job. I wouldn't say I quit that one, Matthew. That one was really a quit. That one was, I'm having a change. And they were great because they let me stay in their offices, but by the printers in the back where all the other PE professionals couldn't see me because I didn't want everyone to start quitting. But they let me stay there, and I started raising capital. And in the end, I raised capital so I got a grant from USAID, which I was very grateful for because that helped me fund a lot of the early stage development costs, which, as you know, is the hardest capital to raise. I also raised equity from MPC Capital, which they've now rebranded to MPC Renewables, and that they're out of Germany. And that allowed me to at least hold off NEON from diluting me, because then I met my obligations to them and I did it within the time frame. But then I held back, again, this is, I guess, my risk my risk metric. I held back a small portion of the equity because I really wanted local capital to invest. I really wanted a local pension fund to have a piece. And so we ended up bringing on board at financial close. So not during the development period, because that obviously is a bit more of a risky period, but Grace Kennedy, their pension fund, put in a small sliver of equity in the deal. And and I had a Goldman advisor who I won't forget as well, who ended up, not the French guy, but the German guy who told me no. But in the end, he was mentoring me, and then I gave him the opportunity to invest without charging him a premium. So he's an investor. So that's the full gamut.
And then I think, unless I'm mistaken, you also succeeded in bringing development capital to the table.
Yes, so that's the equity. So on the debt side, we have two multilaterals. So we have Proparco and we also have FMO, and they provided the debt. So it was $65 million US, roughly about 48 is coming in from the debt, and then the balance is equity.
So nobody asks more probing questions than the financiers.
Yes.
They in every detail. They need to know everything. So what were some of their what do you think what were some of their pain points? Where where it was it the I mean, you obviously went in with a very competitive got a very competitive PPA at 8.5 cents a kilowatt hour, which was at the time, I think, still is a record for the region. Was it that? Were they concerned about that? What were the key concerns of the financiers which you had to overcome?
Sure. So I think a couple of key concerns. So one would be just ensuring that we're able to get all the permits and the documentation. So these projects, it's actually funny because when you see it nice and built, it looks, oh wow, that looks like it was so easy. But when you actually go through it, it's a ton of paper. So we had, like, one of the challenges that we had was in terms of like the tax. There are tax incentives in Jamaica, but there were a number of changes taking place on the back of the IMF deal that was renegotiated a few years beforehand. And so some of the taxes, even though it was written in the law, this is how it is. When you actually come time to getting the certificates and things like that, that was something that we had to work with the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Energy to bring to fruition, who were both great, by the way. They helped, but it still was extra work. And the financiers are really keen on that because obviously that affects the model. The other element is ensuring that we chose the right contractor, so EPC contractor. So the content plant, which is a 20 megawatts, which was built before, that helped us to some extent because at least they'd seen it done. But still, our project is twice as large, and so there were questions around the land, the ability to build there. It was a very bushy piece of land as well, not quite jungle, but 15 years of growth that was never removed. So that, just that risk in terms of geotech and land clearance. And then also just dealing with the utility company. The utility was great in terms of the credit worthiness, but the question of how we split the contract, because normally with JPS, they're the ones who connect the last mile to the grid. That's their strong preference, especially for the high voltage line where we were going. And so we had to split the EPC contract. And what you wanted to make sure was that you didn't have a situation where Eiffage, who was our EPC contractor, built the plant, and then JPS is building the line, but then you have something in the middle and it's not actually connected. So those were some of the points. And one of the last one I would add is in terms of environmental was huge, especially for the multilateral. So ensuring that environmental and community, that the community was on board. So there's this whole social and environmental aspect that was really, really key and critical for us to get that financing.
I know it's a nice segue into the community piece. I know it's something you've emphasized, and we've heard from other investors too, that there's no point in trying to develop a project unless you have got the community behind you. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, talk to us a little bit about that through the lens of, and we're here at an Invest in Jamaica conference. Talk to us a little bit about engaging the community as a priority for investors, for people looking to develop projects. Just how important is it? How do you go about it?
Sure, I would say it's one of your top priorities. I mean, when we were developing this project, one of our first stops was to the local council. So in Jamaica, there's obviously the main government, like a federal government, quote unquote, and then you have the municipal government. And so as part of our bid, and not to give tips to all the other potential competitors out there, but part of our bid, I got the parish council, the mayor, to write a letter saying, we want this project. And they were so happy when we went to see them early on, because what they said was normally they're told when something is going to happen, as opposed to being a part of making it happen. And so I think for our project, engaging with them super early, getting their feedback, understanding what the considerations are for the community and in that area was really key. to bring one, for the project to be successful, but also it gave us a sense as to, how do we want to develop the project? What are some of the pain points that we need to be conscious of to help de-risk the project? Because there's nothing worse than you start to break ground, or you're about to break ground, or even during the middle of diligence and financing where you wouldn't be able to reach financial close, and you find out that the community desperately do not want this project. They don't want, and so solar has had some issues, but less so. I think like hydro projects are one that's a classic one, where if you really don't get the community on board because there are all the stakeholders, that can kill the project. But no one wants to start breaking ground and have people picketing outside, or worse. I'm Jamaican, so I can say this. It could be worse than just picketing outside. So that I think is really, really key.
And as I recall, at your peak employment level, you were employing 300 workers on the site, of which a substantial proportion were drawn
from the community.
Yeah,
from the neighboring communities. So we tried as much as we could. We, on our board meetings and our construction meetings, we had updates, and we would basically track how many persons were being employed from the various neighboring communities. And also we had to track different political parties. You don't want to be hiring more from one party versus the other. I was adamant about tracking female participation. I wish we had a bit more than we had in the end. I think at top end we hit 13%, but on average it was anywhere hovering between 6 to 9, which is really low. But but these are all things that we were tracking, but definitely creating employment for the community. And also it's not even just direct employment. Think about the indirect employment, because all these persons on site need to eat, they need facilities, they need somewhere to stay.
So you checked your boxes on the financing side, on the community engagement side, on choosing the right EPC. What were there any other key milestones that we should know about? Any moments where once you hit that milestone, there was a sort of, right, we're really going to make it?
Sure. So I think if I think back in my mind, the key areas where I was like, yes, like thank God. Number one, obviously, is to win the bid. Number two was to sign with JPS, because in the case of a utility scale, because if you don't have a good offtake, then you don't have a project, period. Number three would be selection of the contractor, et cetera, as you mentioned, and bring them on board, but also just getting to financial close. And getting to financial close, I mentioned it, the tax element is key. Getting all your permits, your NEPA permit, which is the environmental, your local government permit, all of those I think are really critical milestones. And then obviously once you start construction, getting in your first container, right? Just getting that machine moving, clearing stuff from the port, bringing it on site. All of those are key milestones. And then obviously once the plant is turned on, you hope that it works, right? That it works.
That had to be a moment. That had to be an extraordinary moment.
Yeah, exactly. It is extraordinary. I mean, I wasn't there physically, but I remember getting the update from the construction manager, and he would send us like a little snapshot of how many kilowatts. We've just injected our first kilowatt out, an hour, and that's pretty cool. That was really cool.
The gestation. So we're talking 2012 deregulation of the electricity sector, and then the lights go on when 2019. 7 years. 7 years. Yeah. And it's interesting hearing you talk about supply chains. I don't think we've seen another utility scale project in Jamaica come online since then.
No.
And it'd be very interesting, and it's something that you and I'll get to in a minute in terms of what's in store for us. But the supply chain piece now, it would be interesting to know sort of how that would impact time frame and project costs, and
No. I mean, I have some thoughts on that. So firstly, for supply chain, to our plant, it took us a year from financial close to COD. It was 1 year, right? So obviously there's all the permitting, the financing, et cetera, and the bids in between, but that was kind of construction period. So for supply chain right now, we're getting quotations from guys and saying everything is taking twice as long, 3 times as long. Different parts are not available, costing. And in a way, I kind of, I mean, retrospectively, hindsight 2020, it would have been awesome if Jamaica had already issued its RFP, which they've indicated they're going to be doing, because there's a real chance that the pricing is increasing now, right? And I think, well, we did CREF, I guess last week, I think, Matthew, we had like a CREF program. And one of the other panelists, he mentioned that we're seeing like that V in terms of price. Now you could say, well, okay, well, everything else is going up, and what you want is the relative cost, right? So you want to make sure we're still coming in below what other forms of energy are producing. But at the end of the day, you would have locked it in, right? If you had already awarded, you would have locked it in. So we're seeing solar modules are up around 40%. Container shipping is costing a fortune. I mean, a container has increased four times. So it used to be, to land in the Caribbean, call it $4,000. Now it's 15,000. So everything has gone up. And in addition to just the cost of items, there's also the cost of capital. So in terms of, once inflation rates start to increase, in terms of cost of capital, normally how the banks do it is a margin above base rate. And the base rate is, well, it was LIBOR. It's about to change because LIBOR they were doing funny business over here in London with LIBOR. But whatever that base rate is, the reality is that perhaps it's looking to inflect and to increase. So there have been technological advancements, with that said, since then. So modules are much bigger, you're getting more efficiency, but you have to weigh up what is the number going to look like when you weigh up the cost increase of things, of items, and logistics versus technological enhancements. So it'd be interesting to see how the numbers come out for the next tender.
It'll be very interesting to see, and that's a nice introduction to what comes next, and what comes next for you, and what comes next for the Jamaican energy sector. As you identify, there's this RFP we've all been waiting for, pretty big one, 320 megawatts. I think the idea is wind and solar.
And hydro, I think, as well.
And hydro,
they're split.
And that was predicated on the findings of the IRP. So, I mean, let's assume we've got some people with us here today who aren't as familiar with the Jamaican energy space. What can you give us a snapshot? Give us the elevator pitch from the first floor to the 24th floor, or maybe the 18th floor on the implications of the IRP for an investor thinking about coming into Jamaica to try to develop wind and solar, for example.
Sure.
What are the key findings and we'll press the 24th floor button now.
No problem. So the IRP is critical, not just for Jamaica, but for any country, I think, that's looking to increase and add capacity to their grid. It gives a roadmap. It sets some degree of plan or guideline as to how much additional capacity that we need to add to the grid. On the back of that, the next step is implementation, which would be the RFP. And as you mentioned, that should be hopefully coming out soon, perhaps looking like maybe next year at this stage. But the reason why Jamaica is interesting for the quick pitch would be a number of things. One is we have a very solid utility company, which is profitable. It's part-owned, it's privately owned majority, so 80% is private, and then there's a 20% stake that the government basically has. And that gives the ability to have a solid off-taker. The pricing is also done in US dollars. So whilst you may bid, maybe you may receive Jamaican currency, you're able to offset any currency exposure, which is not the case in a number of other emerging market economies, right? Where you're literally taking local currency risk. So that is another big plus for this market. And three, I think that the IRP is a strong commitment for the government to add renewables to the energy mix. And overall, I think it's like 30% by 2030, and sometimes they say 50%. Let's see where we get there. But in general, the country needs it. We have the resources, and it's a solid offtake pair. So I mean, I don't see any reason why an investor would not want to go there.
And I mean, as recently as August of this year, I remember seeing headlines talking about the procurement taking place this year. and now we're all talking about next year. But are you pretty confident that we're going to see this RFP?
Crystal ball. I thought it would have. Yeah, I mean, I thought it would have come out already, to be honest with you. But the reality is there's COVID as well. So COVID, I think, perhaps set things back by at least, let's say, a year, right? At least a year. But yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that next year. I think it's a very, very strong chance. But the ministry also needs to have the capacity to be ready for it and set up the procurement entity that's going to manage it. So we'll see.
And will you be bidding, do you think? I mean, obviously it depends a little bit on the terms, but in principle,
in principle, looking at it for sure, definitely.
But it's very interesting watching your trajectory as a business. You came in, you developed this, I mean, really very substantial solar plant, and now recently you've announced the launch of Soleco. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes. That's why I have a little accent on the E.
I noted
the accent. Calling it Soleco, and the accent's supposed to be a solar panel. But
that accent educated me.
Yeah.
And what Soleco is looking to do, correct me if I'm wrong, is develop C&I, commercial and industrial distributed generation, for not just Jamaica, but for other markets, for the Caribbean, and possibly other market, wherever there is an opportunity, wherever you can come in and so you obviously but I guess let's keep it the conversation focused on Jamaica, given our audience today. You see an opportunity for the growth of distributed. I mean, it's growing a little bit anyway, right, as we speak. But you see real potential for the development of the distributed generation market in Jamaica.
Yeah, absolutely. That, and also perhaps not being patient enough to wait for the RFP. But no, I mean, that was the genesis of it, was that seeing that there are large commercial and industrial customers who haven't yet brought on board some form of renewable energy, and basically running the math and seeing that, look, there is a way for them to save on their energy costs. I think one thing I would say is that our model is not necessarily to take people off the grid. So I'll say that for all my JTS people out there. But it's really it's a financing. At the end of the day, our model is a financing business, right? What we're doing is, there are companies who would like to have renewables, but they may not have the capital to do that, or they would prefer to keep the capital they have to invest it into their main business. So we are basically providing the capital to allow them to do that, and they put zero money down, so nothing down. We will finance the entire thing up front, and we will also help them with the development, right? Because that's another cost point. The cost point is not just the cash, but it's also developing the project and knowing about the EPC contract, PR guarantees, all these fancy terms that if you're doing X type of business, it's not your business. So you would have to spend the time to learn that new language and to learn the business for what effectively could be a one-time installation. So we saw that opportunity, and that's what we've been working on. We signed with our first client last year. We're close to signing with a second one. And so hopefully—
Large contract, I think. Large contract.
Decent sizes. Yeah, I can't say yet how, but yeah. Hopefully, but we're looking to hopefully start construction next year on some of these projects. Fingers crossed.
And I mean, we've heard so much talk about the potential for distributed generation in not just Jamaica, but in the Caribbean, and a lot of people sort of wondering when it's going to take off. And obviously, there are some structural issues in the market which have prevented it from taking off. Structural, relationship with the utility, structural, regulatory. What's the current landscape for developing distributed in Jamaica? I mean, can you come in and set up a solar company and sell to, I mean, what are the exactly? Yeah.
So exactly. So we can't sell electricity to our clients, right? Which is why we structured our model as a leasing model instead. So we can't have a corporate PPA. We can't sell them electrons. So what we do is we basically will finance it for them on a financing lease And so the installation is for the sole use for the client. In Jamaica, in terms of distributed, there are really three main buckets for self-consumption, for auto-consumption. One is net billing, which tends to be quite small. Jamaica has net billing for up to 100 kilowatts. And then there's auxiliary, which is anything above that. And then there's power wheeling, which hasn't yet been done. I would love to do it, but I need the utility to work with me to let that happen. So where we are really targeting is a cross between the net billing and auxiliary space. And so for auxiliary, you have to install a blocking device on the system. You can't actually export anything to the grid. So it's truly only for self-consumption. And that is something that I've been pressing the government on, because I'm thinking, well, why should we install a blocking device? We could give you free, and we're not asking you to pay for it, right? I mean, the net billing cap, I'm fine with the cap, 100 kilowatts max. But if we have excess, you should take it, because as we all know, one of the largest issues that Jamaica has to deal with is we like to call non-technical losses. I like that euphemism. Theft, right? It is theft. Yeah, non-technical losses. So if we're able to give you non-technical gains at no cost, then why wouldn't you take that? Why wouldn't you take the power from us? And there's then questions from the grid in terms of, is that leading to instability of the grid, having bits of drabs of power, coming onto the grid? So those are all not necessarily, I don't see them as challenges, much as just items to resolve, right? Items to resolve. So, but those are the three main buckets. Wheeling hasn't yet been done, but it was drafted, I think, over 10 years ago. Like before I even got into the business, the law existed, and it still hasn't been implemented, which I think is really, I personally think it's a bit of a shame. But so we're pushing the boundary. There are challenges. There's some contracts that still need to be properly drafted and put into place, but we're trying to help the government as much as we can. And we also want to work with the utility. So again, I view this as an opportunity for the utility rather than a threat. They may view it differently, but I think if the utility embraces it, I think it's fascinating, maybe additional business line for them, or different things that they can do, or make money off of people like me, right?
Absolutely.
Take the free energy. We finance, we put it on, take the free energy, or charge us, for the wheeling, just charge us a fair rate so you don't kill it. Don't kill it. Make it thrive, and it can be a very profitable business line for you. Yeah.
Sadly, we're coming towards the end of our fireside chat, but I'd like just to take the last couple of minutes to talk about sort of Jamaica in general, and the ease, or perhaps the unease, of doing business there. And it's interesting hearing you talking about the various sort of rules and regulations around distributed generation. You yourself are Jamaican, you're deeply connected in that market. As an outsider, I suspect we've got some potential investors on the line thinking, how on earth am I supposed to navigate all this? And that's a good question. And so is the key to get on a plane to the extent that one can these days, and to spend the time? Is it, is it to engage a local partner? Is it, do you need a good law firm to advise you sort of on the policy, on the statutes? What advice would you what advice would you have? I suppose the broad question is, if you are sitting in France now and you've got this product and you're excited about Jamaica, what would you do next?
In a way, it could be any of the above, but it depends on what you bring and what you need. So I think engaging a local partner is a good strategy. That's what works with my strategic partner. But you need to trust the partner, right? Partnerships, I think, work best when both parts bring something that the other doesn't necessarily have. I think when there's too much overlap, or you're bringing something that neither party needs, then the partnership doesn't work. But I think that is not a bad strategy. I think getting on a plane, if I didn't have a local partner, then I would definitely engage a group like JAMPRO, who I was hosting the event. That's always a good segue to get plugged into the economy, plugged into the network. But you do need to, you do need to work with the network and get to know people. And I think that's really critical, not just for Jamaica, but any geography. We're looking at things in Barbados. We're working with local partners, right? We're working with people who can give us access, and also who understand the country, understand the culture, and so they can translate it for you. Law firm, yes. Tax advisor, yes. All of the above, check and check. You need both of those, really, really critical.
Get your checkbook out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for the lawyers and the tax advisors. But I always advocate that you should also go on the ground. You don't necessarily need to open an office, but I think you need to go. I mean, I personally would not do business in a country I've never physically been to. And one of the things I learned from my days as an investor is if I won't go there physically, then we probably shouldn't be sending money there, right? You need to feel comfortable in the country.
I think it's, you plugged JAMPRO, I'm going to plug JAMPRO too. I think, I mean, they've been pushing hard now, the energy component, and they've got it's a big organization, it's an influential organization in Jamaica, and they're very connected. They know the right people. Angella, I'm looking at the clock. Our time is up. Any closing thoughts for what we haven't really touched upon is we did a little bit of supply chain and the pandemic and also travel, but let's have your closing thoughts on sentiment for the sort of the national economy, for the opportunity in Jamaica, for the ability to get things done. I mean, clearly you're invested. So that's where your commitment lies. You believe there's every reason to get on that plane to go to Jamaica.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can get things done. Will there be hurdles in the way? Absolutely. But you also want some hurdles to be there, because if the market is so easy, then chances are everything's already been done, right? Or there's no return to be had. But it's also not an impossible market. There are countries where I personally would just not go, because you could be there forever and nothing happens. But Jamaica is, I guess as they say, quote unquote, proof is in the pudding. They have implemented renewable energy projects, right? They've implemented gas projects. Let's not forget the gas guys. So things are happening, change is happening. And that for me is always a good indicator that, it's a growing economy and it's not stagnant. But yeah, there are challenges, but that's why you're there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Angella, it has been an absolute pleasure sharing the stage with you. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. I'm sure that the audience have learned more than they would have expected to. So thank you very much indeed to everyone listening. Best of luck. And we'll look forward to hearing from you about your ventures in Jamaica at future events, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Bye, everyone.